Hi, hey guys, welcome back to Tech 360, and I've got to be honest about something. This review got me a little attached, not just because I have any weird fixations for inanimate objects or anything like that, but purely due to having ample time with this camera, the Panasonic S5. I've literally used this camera sporadically throughout various past reviews on this channel, as well as the phone reviews we also make on Simplified. So do check that channel out if you want to get the best information on smartphones. But yeah, not to say that I'm loyal to any brand, but I think it's fair enough to say when you've invested thousands on an ecosystem of some sort like lenses, filters, and memory cards, you'd want things to just work. So treading into something else ever so often feels as though there's some biasness going on. I mean, subconsciously, before having to look deeper into what makes a camera just another camera. Or is there more here that I'm not seeing? At least that's how I've been training myself to think when it comes to experiencing different cameras. And the Panasonic S5 is surely the type of camera that makes you believe it's an ordinary mirrorless full frame, yet in some areas it's performed far better than Panasonic's latest and highly favorable Micro Four Thirds GH6. But as an overall camera, in my opinion, it performs better than the powerhouse S1H. So hear me out. After spending enough time with something, you'll start to develop a bond, which can look and feel ordinary at first. For instance, this Panasonic S5 shoots internally up to 10-bit 4K 60 and goes up to 6K 12-bit externally. It also does 14 stops of latitude in Vlog. It even has SNQ mode for higher frame rates up to 180 FPS, which is just a treat to have if you're constantly finding yourself shooting in slow-mo like most of you Sony users would be familiar with. It also has Cinema 4K up to 30 FPS and all of the other video-centric features which Panasonic is mostly known for, like waveform, shutter angle options, audio limiters, and something a little unique to this camera, 6.5 stops of dual in-body stabilization, which I'll touch on in the later part of this video. Because what makes a good A-cam, in my opinion, is something that's fast, reliable, and easy to understand. Yeah, you could memorize things and customize functions like to your liking in most cameras, but even then, menu systems like the ones you get on older Sony cameras like my A7 III did a terrible job at helping the user remember where everything is if you didn't set picture profiles or white balance settings to your liking. But of course, the A7 III is considerably an old camera in today's standards, but even if I were to mention a few on the newer A7 IV or S3 and even the latest FX30, it would still feel as though the learning curve is much higher than the menu system you get on Panasonic or Canon cameras. So don't get me wrong, Sony's have improved very much from the previous menu systems and even solved that greenish tint for S-Log profiles, and even their base A7 IV now shoots 10-bit color space. So yeah, I've been a big Sony fan and I do hold a lot of respect from what they do in their camera department until I experienced this Panasonic S5. For one, the ergonomics on this camera suits my right hand so much better than the grip on my A7 III, or mostly any other Alpha series if I'm honest. It's also covered in this leather-like texture for better grip. I mean, whether this material would deteriorate over time when exposed to outside elements, it might not have a bright future as shown in a previous review I made of the S1H. Yeah, that really looked weathered if I'm honest, like it really went through a battle or something. So yeah, go check the video out. SNQ mode, as I mentioned earlier, is available on the top dial, while your necessities such as your white balance and ISO and exposure buttons sit at the right top part here, and along with the trigger and your secondary dial, and of course the big red button for record, just like other Lumix cameras. I also find the joystick on the back better placed, like a feeling like a more natural position for your thumb. It may be a very small shift, but again makes quite a big of a difference. But then again, hand sizes will vary and probably more of a observation than a factual point. And not to forget the trusty autofocus switch close to the viewfinder, which makes a lot of sense when you're using the EVF, having That efficiency to switch between continuous, single, and manual servo. The button in the middle lets you choose further autofocus modes, which I found to use both the oval zone priority for most of my product shots like this iPhone 14 and the 225 area points for everything else. I do still need to take a minute to make some comments about contrast autofocus, which in my books isn't the best on the market, which in this case with the S5, alongside other Panasonic cameras which also use contrast detection autofocus. Compared to Canon's dual pixel or Sony's hybrid phase autofocus, it doesn't compete with the accuracy you get with those systems. If you're coming from either of those platforms, yeah, you'll never complain about it ever again because the difference here is night and day. I've got to admit though that there are moments when it hits and you'll be very pleased with it for a minute. Then there are moments when you really need it to work and it just fails on you. To me, it works best in artificial lighting with different temperatures, such as the environment I have here in the studio, but not so great in daylight, which is weird. Like, you'd expect it to function with more light, right? But I also guess it suggests in the name to how contrast detection autofocus will prioritize higher contrast subjects for the sensor to determine what's in focus, to which works more accurately for still subjects, not moving ones, which also makes most Panasonic cameras a little confusing because you'd really want something to work, and these cameras are more geared for video use anyways. You'd think they'd install something that would effectively be a main priority for most video enthusiasts or professionals, right? Well, after some digging around in the internet, it seems that contrast detection systems are apparently just far cheaper to manufacture, and also might be a reason why most Panasonic cameras are a bargain compared to other hybrid mirrorless cameras of this caliber. Also, fun fact, I know now why such screen designs like the one on the GH6 exist, or the one found on the Nikon Z9, with that dual step articulating screen, like the way it's both a tilt screen and an articulating screen. Well, I just learned that yes, one reason being to maximize viewing angles, heat flow, or in the GH6's case, an inbuilt fan, but also because to clear any obstruction when you have the screen flipped towards the lens while you might have any ports being used. It gives just a bit more room when you have it faced towards you. So neat, right? On this S5, however, I think they just didn't feel the need to fit a fan for a 25.2 megapixel sensor maxing out at 4K. I have yet to heat test this camera so far, so I can't really say for sure, but I don't think so it would overheat, unless, yeah, it's under really hot conditions. Or in simpler terms, it'll just cost more, and they might have just not considered it back in 2020 when this camera was released, which wasn't a good year, if some of you might remember, being a tough period for all businesses and almost all of us anyways. So it could be another reason why this S5 didn't get as much coverage and attention as it deserved, but also factoring how the Sony a7S III came out around exactly the same time, which would have been just an impossible feat to overcome the hype. I mean, that's literally trying to announce a new talent on the block, then immediately getting completely eclipsed by a famously established icon. So yeah, there would be no comparison. Okay, so I just want to mention a few on image quality. I just want to touch on just a bit about what I find to be just the most beautiful parts about using Vlog, like color science in Panasonic cameras. I've said this before, it's beautiful. I mean, like dynamic range and all of that, 14 stops of dynamic range in Vlog, it says for itself. Like you see all the greenery and the blues, they just look natural. And the shadows and highlights in the picture looks all equal in most parts of an image. I do want to mention a bit of that autofocus in this example. I was using the 70 to 300 So it's not a fixed aperture, but yeah, a very big zoom lens. And I found this to be more consistent in terms of autofocus as compared to the wider angle of the 20 to 16 mil. And yeah, for some reason, I found this to be more consistent when it came to autofocus. Maybe it's also because it's closer to the subject. And in this particular example, it was in focus at first, but as soon as the subject started moving, that's when it lost the sharpness of that subject. And it was a shame because like it was one of the only times when that skater made that move stick, and it was a moment that I just simply missed. And this was another situation when I'm shooting in SNQ mode, 120 frames per second. And in this case, yeah, it worked flawlessly. Like I said, there are moments when it sticks, and when it does, it's beautiful. When it doesn't, you get really disappointed because yeah, it depends on your situation. If it's just candid moments like this, of course, you'd want better autofocus. But yeah, going back into that stabilization, the 6.5 stops in body stabilization. Yeah, these clips, I have added warp stabilizer on it, so I'm kind of cheating, but they're still very usable. Of course, walking shots, I think I mentioned before in a previous video where boost EIS should not be enabled when you're taking shots while walking. Most of these shots were completely handheld, and yeah, I don't know why I'm adding this particular footage as an example, but you can see how colors are just, they look very, very natural. Like contrast is not too high, blacks are not too deep, and you still get a lot of detail, especially using a really long zoom lens like that. You get that really nice compression. But yeah, in this case as well, autofocus just tends to warp back and forth and rarely does the job. In this example, however, I shot this in Rec 709, and just to give it a comparison how it would look like in Vlog. Yeah, Rec 709 has way more contrast points, so it does tend to keep everything else in focus. But to be fair, this was very small opening. It was a very high aperture, I think f22, so everything was going to be in focus anyways. But yeah, color wise, we're not too far off. The greens are a bit more punchy in Rec 709 as it's supposed to be, but it still has that film-centric look, which I really prefer. Like having colors that just simply don't look too cheap, like how most smartphone cameras, like Androids especially, they just have that saturation more as compared to, at least in a film philosophy way, iPhones have done them better because in certain areas of the image it looks more equal. But yeah, that's a whole another topic to talk about, which I will be making a review on the iPhone 14 Pro reviews coming soon enough on this channel. But yeah, going back to the Vlog, this shot was 3 stops over. So yeah, quite overexposed, and the whiter parts of the image are overexposed. And going into 2 stops above, it's still very usable, and just above 1 stop, there's not too much of a difference. But yeah, Vlog is just a log profile I've just learned to adapt more when it comes to shooting in situations where I require that extra dynamic range, that extra latitude. Shooting in Rec 709 would cause some images to be overexposed, like the example I was showing earlier. The only reason why I want to mention more on Vlog is mostly because of how Sony's S-Log really takes an eye for you to be shooting in that mode, and it doesn't always hit the mark when it comes to color accuracy. Sometimes it does when you are very aware of the exposure meter, because the S-Log requires you to shoot 2 stops above, you know, just so the sensor would gather enough data of that image. But in this case, like, I can either shoot it overexposed and shoot it underexposed. It may not be actually like 3 stops above or 3 stops under, but while you're still playing around that 1 stop to 2 stop, most likely you can still be using that particular image. So in a way, you can literally shoot this in any condition, just as long as you keep within that measure. But yeah, you have a lot of free play when it comes to shooting in vlog, and it's just the matter of finding the right light, which I have here, which I'll also link in the description if you guys want a link to that. But yeah, color science of the Panasonic cameras are just beautiful. So what am I trying to say here? Is this LUMIX S5 better than most Sony mirrorless cameras? How about this? Put this into consideration next time when you're out to buy a camera. How important is autofocus to you? Because it might cost you thousands. Did I mention that this costs 8,399 Malaysian ringgit or 1,900 US dollars, which is about double the price of a Sony A7S3. Depending on what you do, of course, if you're an events videographer or photographer, then yeah, this S5 shouldn't even be on your list. But if you're shooting commercials and products, or you have your color science matters more to you, then yeah, you could even opt for the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro, which currently you could get about the same price. But of course, that's a whole other platform which doesn't even live on the hybrid ecosystem for both video and photo capture. Nor is it pocketable in any way. Like, I don't know about you, but I think the people at Blackmagic should just fire their product manager. I mean, who in their right mind took a look at the BMPC C4K and thought that was like, yeah, that's pocketable, it's huge. Like, I don't know. But yeah, the Panasonic S5, a Sony A7 IV contender, and maybe some might even consider it to be an A7S3 contender at the price of 2. Whatever it is, I just hope they figure out how to ditch contrast autofocus altogether and maybe replace it with something that actually works every time I need it to. Because reliable autofocus is just something you need in today's world of hybrid cameras. I mean, Sony cameras have flooded the market by being so monotonous and a popular choice amongst camera enthusiasts, but in some way so has the iPhone, yet people still buy this because the ecosystem just works and it'll feel foreign to do the switch. Because good tech in today's standards serves for efficiency, durability and reliability amongst everything else. The Panasonic S5 is a camera I'd choose over my Sony A7 III any day when it comes to stunning image quality and color science, but I'd probably leave it behind when almost everything else I shoot which would need an autofocus, a fast autofocus. As now, their worlds are still quite apart, yet Sony is still superior. But in some ways, I would like to still root for the small guy here. And I'd like to say that Panasonic is not too far away. But yeah, I just can't stop thinking about like, who in the hell thought of the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera to be a great name. But yeah, that's my full review of the Panasonic S5. Do let me know in the conversations down below. And like, if you want to know anything else about this Panasonic S5, I'll leave a link in the description below as well. And yeah, I hope to get to some of your comments if you have any, and I'll see you guys in the next review, the next video. Peace.